This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week, we honor the year in music for 1997, along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1997. We also look at the case for putting Alice in Chains into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Plus, our Spotlight Museum this week is the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. This week, we look at the case for putting the Seattle band Alice in Chains into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As we always do, to the tail of the tape we go. Alice in Chains put out 6 full albums. Of those, all but one of them hit the top 15, with 4 of those hitting the top 6, and one, their third album, self-titled, hitting number 1 and selling 2 million copies. Their first album, Facelift, sold 3 million copies in America. Their second album, Dirt, was their most successful, selling 5 million copies, but only for some reason making it to number 6 on the albums chart. The only other album to sell anything major was 2009's album, Black Gives Way to Blue, selling 500,000 copies. Out of their 3 live albums, the MTV Unplugged album hit number 3 on the albums chart and sold 2 million copies. Out of their 5 compilation albums, 2 of them, 1999's Nothing's Safe, Best of the Box, and 2001's Greatest Hits, went platinum, while 2 of the others hit gold and one of them didn't actually do all that much. They also had 3 EPs. Of those, 1992's Sap sold 500,000 copies, while 1994's Jar of Flies sold 4 million copies and became the first EP to hit number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart. As far as their singles went, they put out 32 of them. Of those, none of them hit the top 40 on the pop charts. On the rock charts, though, it's a completely different story. They had 30 hit the top 40, with 18 of those hitting the top 10 and 5 of those hitting number 1. Strangely, on the rock charts, only one song, 1994's No Excuses, hit number 1 in lead singer Lane Staley's time with the band, with the other 4 number 1s coming in 2009, 2012, and 2013, long after Lane's untimely death on April 5, 2002. Alice in Chains have sold over 14 million copies in America and 30 million copies worldwide. They've been also nominated for 11 Grammy Awards with no wins. They were nominated for 3 MTV Video Music Awards, winning 1 for 1993's song Wood off of the single soundtrack for Best Video from a Film. VH1 put them at number 34 on their Greatest Hard Rock Artists of All Time list. Hit Parader said that they were the 15th greatest live band of all time. I would agree. I've seen them. Great band. Here's the reason why Alice in Chains belongs in the hall. They were one of the 4 most influential bands to come out of the Seattle sound era, the other 3, of course, being Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Soundgarden. 2 of those 3 are already in the hall, with Soundgarden not quite in yet, and that is another thing that upsets me, but we'll get to that on a different podcast. They've influenced tons of bands like Avenged Sevenfold, Creed, Queens of the Stone Age, Seether, Manic Street Preacher, Godsmack, Smashing Pumpkins, and even Metallica, who were influenced by Alice on Metallica's 2008 album Death Magnetic. Plus, lead guitarist and songwriter Jerry Cantrell is considered a god in the rock world, with even Elton John wanting to work with him. As far as the criteria for getting into the hall, they have the industry respect, plus the award nods and commercial success thrown in just for good measure, and yet still no love from the Rock Hall. This needs to change pronto. And before you ask, no, having their claymation dolls from their music video for their song I Stay Away in the hall's collection does not count for them actually being in the hall. Alice in Chains should be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on their own merit, although the claymation doll thing is kind of nice, not going to lie. But to prove my point, we have put all of their major albums while Lane Staley was still around onto this week's podcast playlist, the link to which is in the show notes. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you that there is now a Music History In-Depth podcast where we go more in-depth on a few of the events that happened in music history for that particular week. The Music History In-Depth podcast drops every Tuesday on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from, as does our Music History Today podcast, which goes over the daily events in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. The year was 1997. In music, the song Candle in the Wind, the Princess Diana edition, was first played at Princess Diana's funeral and then released as a single. It became the biggest-selling single of the year and of all time worldwide. The biggest phenomenon of the year was also related to Great Britain, Spice Girl Mania, as the Spice Girls released their debut album and then released their movie Spice World at the end of the year. Other artists who burst onto the scene in 1997 included Third Eye Blind, the Backstreet Boys, Meredith Brooks, Duncan Sheik, Savage Garden, Paula Cole, Missy Elliott, and Hanson. Radiohead also released their iconic album OK Computer that year. Also out in 1997, blank recordable CDs, as the big three recording companies, TDK, Maxell, and Memorex, all put out different versions of the new technology. The Spice Girls album Spice was the biggest selling album of 1997, according to Billboard magazine. Other big albums were by Radiohead, U2, No Doubt, Notorious B.I.G., Puff Daddy, Mace, George Strait, Aerosmith, Scarface, Prodigy, Oasis, and Celine Dion. Aside from Elton John's Candle in the Wind Princess Diana single, other big singles for the year included Jewel's You Were Meant for Me, Puff Daddy's I'll Be Missing You, and also Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, Toni Braxton's Unbreak My Heart, R. Kelly's I Believe I Can Fly, En Vogue's Don't Let Go, Mark Morrison's classic Return of the Mac, LeAnn Rimes' How Do I Live, and the Spice Girls' Wannabe. In country music, Garth Brooks played to over 1 million fans at a free concert in Central Park in New York City. Shania Twain released her album, Come On Over, which became the biggest-selling country album of all time. Other big albums included George Strait's Carrying Your Love With Me, LeAnn Rimes' Unchained Melody, The Early Years, and also You Light Up My Life inspirational songs. Tim McGraw's Everywhere, Trisha Yearwood's Songbook, a collection of hits, Garth Brooks' Sevens, Brooks and Dunn's The Greatest Hits collection, Colin Ray's The Best of Colin Ray, Direct Hits, and Tracy Lawrence's The Coast is Clear. Trisha Yearwood and LeAnn Rimes both recorded versions of the song How Do I Live for the Nicolas Cage movie Con Air. Rimes was asked to record it first, but the record label thought that her voice sounded too young for the song, so they got Trisha Yearwood to sing it. Both versions ended up being released. While LeAnn Rimes' version hit number 2 on the pop charts, Trisha's version made it big on the country charts. Tim McGraw and Faith Hill's song It's Your Love became the first song to spend 6 straight weeks at number 1 on the country charts in 20 years. Other artists with big country hits included Shania Twain's Love Gets Me Every Time, Kevin Sharp's Nobody Knows, George Strait's One Night at a Time, Deanna Carter's How Do I Get There, Clay Walker's Rumor Has It, Kenny Chesney's She's Got It All, Garth Brooks' Long Neck Bottle, Brooks and Dunn's A Man This Lonely, and Reba McEntire's How Was I to Know. In hip-hop, P. Diddy / Puff Daddy and The Family's No Way Out was one of the biggest albums of the year. Other big albums were Notorious B.I.G.'s Life After Death, Wu-Tang Clan's Wu-Tang Forever, Tupac's Are You Still Down, Bone Thugs and Harmony's The Art of War, Mace's Harlem World, and Master P's Ghetto D. 2 songs from P. Diddy's album went to the top of the charts. I'll Be Missing You, Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, while All About the Benjamins went to number 2. The late Notorious B.I.G. hit number 1 posthumously with Hypnotized and Mo Money, Mo Problems. Other big hip-hop songs included Bone Thugs and Harmony's Look Into My Eyes, Da Brat's Ghetto Love, Scarface's Smile, Mace's Feels So Good, Busta Rhymes' Dangerous, Coolio's See You When You Get There, Timbaland and Magoo's Up Jumps the Boogie, and Warren G's I Shot the Sheriff. In dance music, the famed Hacienda Club in Manchester, England was shut down due to bad behavior at the club, including some shootings and a fatal drug overdose. The first Electric Daisy Carnival Music Festival took place, not in its recent location of Las Vegas, but in its original location of Los Angeles. Dance music was dominated on the charts by pop and R&B artists like Toni Braxton, U2, Madonna, Kenny G, Janet Jackson, George Michael, Mariah Carey, Usher, and P. Diddy. And even though those artists were all over the number 1 dance slots on the dance charts, there were some more quote-unquote legit EDM artists who made an impact. For instance, Daft Punk released their debut album Homework and their landmark songs Da Funk and Around the World. Da Funk and Around the World both went to number 1. The Chemical Brothers put out their album Dig Your Own Hole, while Bjork released Homogenic. Faithless's classic song Insomnia was also at the top of the dance charts, as were The Prodigy's Smack My Bitch Up, Olive's You're Not Alone, Funky Green Dog's Fired Up, Moby's James Bond Theme, Sash's Ecuador, Ultra Natty's Free, Todd Terry's Something Going On, and Robert Miles's Fable. DJ Mag had its very first Top 100 DJs list that was voted on by readers and not by music critics. And according to that, the top 10 on the chart were Carl Cox, Paul Oakenfold, Sasha, Judge Jules, Tony DeVitt, Pete Tong, Danny Rampling, Hype, Groove Rider, and Jeremy Healy. In Latin music, the biggest artists were Julio and Enrique Iglesias, Grupo Limité, Selena, Shakira, Luis Miguel, the Gypsy Kings, Juan Gabriel, Los Temerarios, and Los Del Rio, who went back to that Macarena well to try to repeat the success of their 1996 smash hit Macarena with their new song Macarena Nonstop. In music theater, musicals that opened in 1997 included Titanic, Dream, The Scarlet Pimpernel, Jekyll and Hyde, and The Lion King. Musical revivals that opened included 1776, Candide, and Annie. The Spice Girls movie Spice World came out in December that year. There were other musical films released, though. For instance, you had Selena, starring Jennifer Lopez. You had the documentaries Year of the Horse about Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and Rhyme and Reason about hip-hop. There were also the animated musicals Anastasia, Cats Don't Dance, and Disney's Hercules. There was also the Disney Channel movie Cinderella, which starred Brandy as the title character and Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother, and even though they were black women playing what were traditionally white European fantasy roles, no one made a big deal about it. Unlike 2023's Little Mermaid's Black Mermaid. Seriously, people, get over yourselves already. Anyway, bands that formed in 1997 included Coldplay, the Buckwheat Boys, Death Cab for Cutie, Destiny's Child, Eiffel 65, Gym Class Heroes, Interpol, the Plain White T's, Newfound Glory, the New Radicals, Solar Stone, Venga Boys, Yin Yang Twins, and the White Stripes. Bands who broke up before their inevitable reunions or who announced their hiatuses included Accept, My Bloody Valentine, Bonham, Low Life, The Kinks, Big Audio Dynamite, Lodestar, New Riders of the Purple Sage, Obituary, Quad City DJs, The Rembrandts, Dinosaur Jr., The Power Station, EMF, Rainbow, Reel to Reel, Diatribe, Bread, The Cocteau Twins, The Fugees, The Gin Blossoms, Ghost Town DJs, Ugly Kid Joe, Throwing Muses, and Soundgarden. Bands that reformed in 1997 included Blondie, Depeche Mode, Echo and the Bunnymen, Jane's Addiction, and Sunny Day Real Estate. Artists who were born in 1997 included DJ Alan Walker, rappers Coi Leray, Lil Yachty, Rico Nasty, Blueface, Cupcake, Asia Doll, Kodak Black, 070 Shake, and Lalissa Manaban, along with singers Young Kook of BTS, Camila Cabello, Becky G, Her, Rose from Blackpink, Ruby Rose, the DJ and actress, Bella Thorne, the singer and actress, Rebecca Black of Friday fame, Dina Lane from Fifth Harmony, Park Jimin, Zara Larson, Phineas O'Connell, otherwise known as Billie Eilish's brother, Georgia Smith, and Youngblood. Artists who passed away in 1997 included the Notorious B.I.G., who was shot and killed, and which was why all his albums suddenly shot up the charts. No pun intended. Also, singers Townes Van Zandt, Michael Hutchence of INXS, who committed suicide, John Denver, who passed away in an experimental airplane crash, Jeff Buckley, who accidentally drowned, Fela Kuti, Laura Nyro, Laverne Baker, Nicolette Larson, Ronnie Lane, Jimmy Rogers, Jimmy Witherspoon, Johnny Copeland, Thelma Carpenter, Billy McKenzie of The Associates, Ron Holden, Lawrence Payton of the Four Tops, guitarist Randy California, Luther Allison, and Michael Hedges, Elvis Presley's manager Colonel Tom Parker, opera singer Charles Craig, conductor George Solti, drummer Tony Williams, and jazz violinist Stefan Grappelli. In awards for the music of 1997, Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind won Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards, while Sean Colvin's Sonny Came Home won Song and Record of the Year. Paula Cole won Best New Artist. The ceremony, though, is probably better known for when New York actor Michael Portnoy went on stage shirtless during Bob Dylan's performance of his song Lovesick and started dancing, with the words "soy bomb" written on his bare chest, before being escorted off stage by security. At the MTV Video Music Awards, Jamiroquai won Video of the Year for Virtual Insanity. Leanne Rimes won Artist of the Year at the Billboard Music Awards. The Spice Girls were the big winners at the American Music Awards. Erykah Badu was the big winner at the Soul Train Music Awards. Whitney Houston, Reba McEntire, and Garth Brooks won the music categories at the People's Choice Awards. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Dublin, Ireland that year, Katrina and the Waves from England won for the song Love Shine a Light. Katrina and the Waves were also one of the better-known Eurovision contestants since Celine Dion in 1988, with Katrina and the Waves having found commercial success originally in 1985 with the hit song Walking on Sunshine. Garth Brooks won Entertainer of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards, and he also won the same award at the Academy of Country Music Awards. The Verve won Best British Album for Urban Hymns, and All Saints won Best Song for Never Ever at the Brit Awards. Sarah McLachlan won Best Album for Surfacing, and she also won Best Song for Building a Mystery at the Juno Awards. Savage Garden won Album of the Year for their self-titled album, and Song of the Year for Truly Madly Deeply at the ARIA Music Awards. At the Tony Awards, Titanic won Best Musical, and Chicago won Best Revival of a Musical. Musically at the Academy Awards, My Heart Will Go On from Titanic won Best Song, since Best Film Score was actually split that year into two different categories. Anne Dudley's The Full Monty score won Best Film Score for Musical and Comedy, while James Horner's score for Titanic won Best Dramatic Film Score. The Pulitzer Prize for music went to Blood on the Fields by Wynton Marsalis, who became the first jazz artist to win that particular award. Ronnie Size and Represent won the Mercury Prize for the album New Forms, and Paul McCartney was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II that year. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on May 6th at the Renaissance Cleveland Hotel in Cleveland, Ohio, for the first time since 1986, when it had always been held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. There was some drama before the ceremony, though, as Buffalo Springfield inductee Neil Young did not show up for the induction because he was protesting people having to pay $1,500 per plate to be inducted. He was also protesting that the ceremony was being broadcasted on VH1 for some reason or other. Fellow Buffalo Springfield bandmate Stephen Stills was inducted twice that night. Once as a member of Buffalo Springfield, and once as a member of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. At the ceremony, the Hall inducted King Records founder Sid Nathan into the non-performers category. Mahalia Jackson and Bill Monroe were inducted into the early influencers category. In the performers category, the Hall inducted the Bee Gees, Buffalo Springfield, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Joni Mitchell, the Young Rascals, the Jackson 5, and this next group. If you are a fan of early hip-hop, then known as rap music, then you know that a lot of the samples came from two different people, James Brown and George Clinton. In fact, they were sampled so much that they could have never worked again in their lives and lived off the royalties if any of those people actually paid them royalties for the samples they took. What James Brown did for soul and R&B music, George Clinton did for funk music, injecting it with a psychedelic blend, inventing a new form of music called P-Funk, and all with a performance showmanship that has often been imitated but never duplicated ever since. George Clinton himself was born on July 22, 1941. He started a group at age 15 in Plainfield, New Jersey called the Parliaments, whose name he took from Parliament cigarettes. In the early days, their musical style was influenced by doo-wop and vocal R&B acts at the time. They also garnered local recognition for their soulful performances and tight harmonies, displaying early signs of their musical prowess. In 1964, George decided to get a backup band for the group and dropped doo-wop for smooth funk. His first backup band had Eddie Hazel on lead guitar, Tal Ross on rhythm guitar, Billy Bass Nelson on bass, Tiki Fullwood on drums, and Mickey Atkins on keyboards. The Parliaments caught the attention of Motown Records in the early 1960s, and after Motown signed them, they released a bunch of singles, including the regional hit I Want to Testify in 1967. However, despite some regional success in the upper Midwest area, the Parliament struggled to achieve widespread national recognition under the Motown record label. Frustrated with Motown and looking for a new direction, the group underwent a significant transformation. Due to the record label that they ended up on, Revolt Records, going bankrupt, they lost the rights to the name The Parliaments. The Parliaments then had to rebrand themselves as Parliament, shedding their previous sound and embracing a more experimental and progressive approach. This transformation allowed them to explore new musical territories and break free from the Motown assembly line way of doing things. Parliament's evolution was marked by a fusion of funk, soul, and various musical influences, drawing inspiration from the energy of James Brown, the psychedelic sounds at the time of Jimi Hendrix, and the more eclectic nature of Sly and the Family Stone. Parliament crafted a distinct funk sound characterized by infectious bass lines, intricate horn arrangements, and Clinton's distinctive vocal style. The band's breakthrough came with the release of their landmark album, The Mothership Connection, in 1975. This album introduced the concept of an intergalactic funk mythology with band members portraying extraterrestrial characters. The concept became a recurring theme in their subsequent albums and live performances, sometimes with over 40 performers on stage, and with the iconic Mothership stage prop becoming a symbol of Parliament's imaginative and theatrical approach. The Mothership stage prop is actually in the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., along with some of the group's costumes. In 1968, George also decided to add an additional project to his repertoire. He took his backup band and called the new band Funkadelic, establishing their distinct musical identity and creating the new musical genre P-Funk. Billy Bass Nelson is the person who's credited with calling the band Funkadelic. This change reflected their intention to delve into a heavier, more guitar-oriented sound while retaining the rhythmic foundations of funk music. And it was also during this time that the band's lineup expanded to include such legendary performers as Bootsy Collins on bass and Bernie Worrell on keyboards. Eventually, after having both groups running separately at the same time in order to take care of George's creative ideas, both bands would merge into Parliament Funkadelic. There were also spin-offs of the band such as Bootsy's Rubber Band and the Brides of Funkenstein. Funkadelic's self-titled debut album, released in 1970, showcased their experimental approach to music. Tracks like I'll Bet You and Music for My Mother epitomize their unique blend of psychedelic elements, distorted guitar riffs, and soulful vocals. Funkadelic's subsequent albums continued to push the boundaries of musical innovation. Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow, which was released in 1970, and Maggot Brain, which was released in 1971, exemplified the band's cosmic themes and experimentation. These albums featured extended jams, soulful ballads, and mesmerizing guitar solos, creating expansive sonic landscapes that captivated the listeners at the time. And while initially operating outside the mainstream, Funkadelic achieved commercial success with the release of their album One Nation Under a Groove in 1978. The title track became an instant funk anthem embodying the band's message of unity and musical liberation. This commercial breakthrough propelled Funkadelic into the mainstream, solidifying their position as one of the foremost funk rock acts of the era. Funkadelic's influence extended far beyond their commercial success. Their groundbreaking fusion of funk, rock, and psychedelia inspired countless musicians across many genres. Their experimental sound, socially conscious lyrics, and mesmerizing stage performances left an indelible mark on the music industry as a whole. Artists ranging from Prince and the Red Hot Chili Peppers to contemporary funk and rock acts continue to draw inspiration from Funkadelic's eclectic and boundary-breaking approach. As the 1980s came around, the collective broke up and went their separate ways. A lot of them went on to other projects, solo albums, or guest spots on other artists' tours. For instance, Bernie Worrell, for a time, went on tour with the group The Pretenders. Bootsy Collins ended up in a number of artists' songs, most notably Delight's classic dance track Groove is in the Heart, along with putting out his own albums. George kept going with solo work and had the hit song Atomic Dog, which got sampled a ton of times, along with getting put in various commercials and movies having dogs in them, of course. George eventually put a new collective of artists together for the 21st century, named them Parliament Funkadelic, and went out on tour. Due to worsening medical conditions, he's either in the middle of his now extremely lengthy farewell tour, or he's finally concluded it, at least of this podcast. Either separately or as a combined collective, the group put out some of the most iconic funk albums and songs of all time. Albums such as The Mothership Connection, One Nation Under a Groove, and Up for the Downstroke, along with singles such as Stomp, my personal favorite, One Nation Under a Groove, and Flashlight. They've also received a Grammy Award as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Recording Academy. When it came time for the collective to be inducted, the list of official inductees was whittled down from almost 100 different members over the decades to 15 inductees. Presented for induction by 2004 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee Prince, All Hail the Mothership. The inductees: Bernie Worrell, Bootsy Collins, Calvin Thang Simon, Cardell Boogie Mawson, Clarence Fuzzy Haskins, Eddie Hazel, Gary M. Scheider, Gene Grady Thomas, Glenn Lamont Goins, Jerome Bigfoot Braley, Michael Kid Funkadelic Hampton, Raymond Davis, Tiki Fullwood, Walter Junie Morrison, William Billy Bass Nelson Jr., and of course, the P-Funk master himself, Mr. George Clinton. The collective known as Parliament Funkadelic, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997, and we have a selection of their music on this week's music podcast playlist, the link to which is in the show notes. This week's Spotlight Museum is the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The museum is located on the National Mall, right across the street from the Washington Monument. The museum highlights the experience and contributions of African Americans to specifically America and, more broadly, the world. A lot of the museum deals with slavery and civil rights. There's an actual slave cabin, an airplane that was flown by a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, as well as items pertaining to the military, religion, literature, and politics. The museum also has an extensive collection of artifacts concerning music. The museum boasts Chuck Berry's Pink Cadillac, for instance. Also, stage costumes worn by Parliament Funkadelic and others, along with other recordings, sheet music, photos, and such. There's also a great online resource on their website where they put a lot of their collection online for people to look at. The museum is open daily from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Admission is free. After all, your tax dollars paid for it. However, the only way that you can walk into the museum without a pass is if you show your military ID. Otherwise, you either have to try to get timed passes in the mornings, especially on the morning that you want to go, which really you need to get there early because those things run out very quickly. There is another way that you can get them. You can get passes in advance online. So check the museum's website, which is nmaahc.si.edu, for information about the time passes along with COVID admission information, because, you know, those things tend to change on a whim depending on what's going on. We'll put the website's link in the show notes as well. Rosetta Rubin was born on March 20th, 1915 in Cotton Plant, Arkansas, to Katie Bell Newbin. At least that's the official story of her birth. Some researchers also think that her name was actually Rosetta Atkins, and she was born to Katie Harper. Not much is known about her father except that he was a singer. What is definitely known is that Rosetta's mother was a singer who was also heavily involved in the church as a singer and a preacher. She was also a feminist who encouraged women in the congregation to sing, but Rosetta's mother also taught the spiritual word in church, which was relatively unheard of in that era. Rosetta's mother had an impact on her daughter, both in attitude and in her career choice. It was her mother who introduced Rosetta to gospel music and also to the guitar at age 6. Rosetta became very proficient at playing the guitar and was still, at 6 years old, traveling and playing with her mother as part of a traveling ministry show. They toured the South for a few years until they moved to Chicago, Illinois. For the next decade, Rosetta and her mother toured the North, where Rosetta developed a reputation as a child prodigy. She also fell in love with, and at age 19, married a preacher who toured with them. At this point, Rosetta then took her new husband's last name, Tharpe, changed a vowel, and made that her stage name that we all know her by now, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. At the age of 23, Rosetta started recording gospel songs for Decca Records. In fact, she recorded her first 4 gospel songs while being backed up by an orchestra. Those 4 songs, The Lonesome Road, My Man and I, Rock Me, and That's All, became big hits and turned Rosetta into a sensation. The song Rock Me became a very influential song on future rock and roll artists like Elvis Presley and Little Richard. Her song Down by the Riverside was selected for preservation at the National Recording Registry of the U.S. Library of Congress. Some of her songs actually ended up creating some controversy for her. See, at the time, it was tough being a female guitarist, as they were pretty rare at that point. It was even rarer when the female guitarist was black. What Rosetta did with her music, and one of the main reasons why she was finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, was that she started combining gospel and secular music, and also started playing with secular artists in places like the Cotton Club in New York City. That did not sit well at all with the gospel crowd, who started leaving her. She actually wanted to go back to mainly gospel music in 1943, but she was obligated by her contract to play more secular recordings. Rosetta teamed up with Marie Knight and recorded a bunch of duets and went on tour with Marie. By the end of the 1940s, though, the partnership started to break up due to other artists like Mahalia Jackson gaining more popularity. Rosetta still kept touring and recording, even touring over in Europe, until her death from a stroke on October 9th, 1973. Rosetta's influence on rock and roll is immeasurable. She influenced pretty much all of the early rock and roll artists, especially during a concert in Manchester, England on May 7, 1964, that was said to influence attendees Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, and Jeff Beck. Her use of heavy distortion in her guitar kick-started electric blues. Also, she set the bar for female guitarists with the tenacity and determination that she inherited from her mother. And you can find pictures and music from Sister Rosetta Tharpe at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and, of course, we have put her greatest hits on our podcast playlist for this week, the link to which, as I've said already, is in the show notes. The Music Halls of Fame podcast is part of the Music History Today network, which can be found under Music History Today on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcast from, and also on our YouTube page under Music History Today. Thank you very much for listening.